The United States struck civilian water infrastructure in Iran this week, 2 reservoirs serving 20,000 people, while calling the strike surgical and military targeted. Some might call this an act of treason. Nearly 2,000 Iranian civilians have been killed since this war began. The administration claims a deal is finalized. Iran says nothing has been agreed. Meanwhile, Congress defunded the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, gutting 1,500 public media stations, including the NewsHour, where our guest, the esteemed Terence Smith, built his career. Our guest covered 4 wars over 5 decades, and he wrote last month, "I've never seen the like of it." Neither have you and I, Tom. Welcome to True Journalism.
Richard.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're great to have you here, Terry. When we often kind of preface things talking about the Fairness Doctrine, and I'll say when the Fairness Doctrine fell in 1987, it silenced the institutional memory that held power accountable across administrations. Terry Smith carries that memory personally, again, as you said, Richard, in the title of your wonderful book, 5 Presidents, 4 Wars, 40 Countries, a very impressive career as a foreign correspondent. The archive in his reporting is exactly what today's media infrastructure has been designed to destroy, which is very troubling. The team that he built for media criticism and analysis at the PBS NewsHour is part of this big defunding target, which is terrible as far as I'm concerned. The body counts that Terry learned to distrust in coverage of the Vietnam War and so on are repeating on a new battlefield. So there's what comes around once again.
History repeats itself, for sure, yes. So our guest, Terence Smith, spent 20 years at the New York Times, 8 of them in the Middle East covering the 4 wars, and he earned 2 Pulitzer nominations. At CBS, he won 2 Emmys and shared a Peabody at CBS Sunday Morning. As Tom said, he built the PBS NewsHour Media Criticism Unit, earning 18 national awards. And boy, do we miss that today. And his memoir, 4 Wars, 5 Presidents. Our co-host, Tom Martin's CBS Saturday Morning colleague, Terry Smith. Welcome to True Journalism.
Sunday morning.
Sunday morning, sorry.
One day off. Well, repeat that.
Welcome, Terry. It's great to have you here. I love the stories that we did together. That was a number of years ago. Terry's a passionate sailor, and so we did one about an all-female sailing team that sailed all the oceans of the world, the Whitbread Around the World sailing race. And we did another, I remember, we did many stories, but one that I also remember is about overfishing the oceans. I think we interviewed, Gary was senator of Massachusetts up there talking to the fishermen in Gloucester and whatnot. But I love all the stuff that we did together. So it's great to have you here.
One correction, it's Gloucester.
That's right.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate both. Tom, we certainly had a lot of good times, didn't we?
Absolutely.
So let's start off with kind of a reflection back. You were in Jerusalem on that June 15th, 1967, day 1 of the 6-Day War. And you just wrote now 59 years later, now that Israel is fighting on 4 fronts. What do you see today that you couldn't have imagined back then?
It was impossible to imagine that 59 years later, the essential struggle between Israel and the Palestinians would still be underway. And the reason it was so difficult was the outcome of the 6-Day War in 1967. The Israeli victory was so total, in which they defeated the armies of their Arab neighbors, and they captured the West Bank of the Jordan, from Jordan, and of course the Sinai and the parts of the Golan Heights. But the main point is, it was a complete and total victory. And the people that I was talking to in Jerusalem in the immediate aftermath of the war absolutely believed that peace was coming and coming soon, and that a compromise of some sort would be reached. Some sort of 2-state solution would be hammered out. And because there seemed no other option. Well, here we are 59 years later. and that is still elusive and has eluded the world. So it is extraordinary on one hand, and on the other, it suggests that really very little has changed, that the fundamental struggle, they always said two peoples, two countries, or what is the truth, two peoples who are in one country, one area, and struggling with each other. So they still are all these years later. And I guess there's some lesson in that for all of us.
And for Terry, I thought it was interesting when you were telling me yesterday when we spoke by phone, and there's a lot of speculation. I mean, again, on this podcast, we try not to be biased, not to be polarized, but some kind of difficult. People speculating, why has Donald Trump taken the action that he's taken? Is there pressure being applied from Israel? The whole way that Benjamin Netanyahu is carrying things. And I thought what you were telling me, your observations, your belief was very interesting. Can you share that with us?
Absolutely. I mean, it was important, crucial, if you like, to Bibi Netanyahu, who's going into national elections and is behind in his attempted re-election, going into national elections in September, and for him to suddenly be a wartime president, or in his case, prime minister, a wartime leader who I'm sure hopes that the Israeli public would say, well, we're not going to change horses midstream. Now, I'm not at all sure that's going to work, but I think it's what motivated Bibi Netanyahu, who I met back in the 1970s when he was a backbencher in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. I think that's what motivated him to press and push Donald Trump to launch the war against Iran and to carry out the attacks that we've all seen. It serves a political purpose for Bibi Netanyahu. Well, maybe it even serves a purpose for Donald Trump, in that it diverts attention from some things.
Jeffrey Epstein,
the Epstein files, inflation,
where
cost of living, you name it. And so he too is positioning himself as a wartime leader.
I think the difference there is Trump's miscalculation is that this has cost him dearly at the polls. And the perception that this was a surgical strike and attack and an in and out. There's a reason why no prior president in the U.S. for 46 years partnered with Israel to invade one of their enemies, not the least of which Iran, a sovereign nation with 92 million people that are more than up to the task. What are your thoughts on that, Terence?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the bottom line is Iran is not Venezuela. Venezuela is not Iran. You don't go into Tehran and pluck out the supreme leader and bring him to a New York courtroom. This is, for the reasons you just cited, Richard, a whole nother project. What I wonder is when Donald Trump goes to bed at night, if he does, and he turns out the light, does he feel that he has been suckered, in effect, by Bibi Netanyahu for Netanyahu's political reasons? I don't know. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, there was about I don't know who reported the story behind the scenes, yelling at Netanyahu and
calling him crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think Trump didn't anticipate that Israel would invade Lebanon as kind of a 1A part of this whole schematic, which I knew that Netanyahu figured on since day one. And that, of course, has created a lot of consternation in that kind of triad relationship between Iran, Israel, America, actually 4 components. And Lebanon has jeopardized any kind of agreement, ceasefire. But again, it's because Bibi Netanyahu's, to your point, Terence, that's part of his agenda to move forward.
I would argue that if Donald Trump didn't anticipate that, didn't know that Iran was likely to tell Hezbollah to carry out attacks in northern Israel, if he didn't know that and anticipate it, and that Israel would respond in a lethal fashion, then he is not paying attention, because that's so obvious, so inevitable.
Yeah.
And it still is. It still is. In other words, yes, he might strike an understanding with the current leaders in Tehran, but that's not going to turn off Israel's effort to launch military action against Hezbollah. Now, there was an interesting article the other day suggesting that by somebody in Lebanon who I thought summed it up brilliantly. He said, you can't separate Hezbollah from the Iranian populace or populace. There are too many Shiites in Lebanon who support Hezbollah, at least politically, and maybe more. And so you're not going to do that. So you're not going to destroy them by military means. You've got to negotiate a solution.
Yeah.
Even though you say you don't negotiate with terrorists.
I wanted to add just one kind of personal note, and then maybe we could pivot to another topic. I mean, we can, quite fascinating. We could talk a lot about this, obviously. But it's funny, a number of years ago, before Trump ran for president the first time, I managed to get a ticket to a PBS taping of it. It was like some classy title, like How to Get Rich, featuring Donald Trump. It was to promote Trump University.
Robert Kurosawa, probably, yeah.
It was organized by the gentleman who runs the Learning.
Oh, yes.
And so they said, some people ask questions. I said, I'll ask a question. I thought, what question can I ask Donald Trump? And here's the card. You'll read this question. Like, oh, okay. I guess that's the way it's being done here. And so the question they invited me to read, scripted by Donald himself. It's like, everybody talks about positive thinking, but you say there's value in negative thinking. What do you mean by that? And the more, as we watch the situation in Iran play out, Terry, you're much more knowledgeable than I am about all of this, but it's just like, how could he not, like the Strait of Hormuz, could you not?
Well, the problem is not that he didn't know. The problem is his generals told him, but he chose to ignore them. I mean, there's been some information that's been out there to that effect. In fact, I remember it was either Rubio or Hegseth when they reported that caused a big blow up.
Nice.
And I believe several leaders in the cabinet and or the military were dismissed because they had the audacity to not be telling Donald Trump what he wanted to hear. And most people in the military had grave reservations over starting a war with Iran.
It's a good point.
For the obvious reasons.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, Terry, if you want to add something, and then...
just that brief comment.
Yeah.
Your line, you don't know whether Donald Trump hears that. He hears what he wants to hear, not necessarily what in reality may be. Yeah. And so that's the basis for his actions.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're not near the end of our conversation here by any means, but there's a couple of different topics we'd love to talk to you about, Terry, with your so many years of experience and your wisdom. And one is kind of the general sense of journalism today. And I know you covered the Vietnam War, and just as we were talking about the situation in Iran and also especially Israel, and I was thinking about some of the protest movements on campuses about conflating Hamas with the Palestinians, and it was like this sense of confusion. I was somewhat younger during the Vietnam era, but I seem to remember there was that same sense of confusion about casualty numbers. There was not clarity for sure. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are about all of that and what that says about the state of journalism right now.
You know, Vietnam was an incredible challenge journalistically, because on a daily basis in Saigon, I was there as the New York Times bureau chief, heading up what was then the largest overseas bureau in the world for the New York Times. And every day there would be a briefing from the U.S. military about the previous 24 hours action. And they would describe elevated body counts and victories that simply didn't exist. So much so they were known, the briefings were known among reporters as the 5 o'clock follies. So what you had to do as a reporter was listen to them, question them, and then either you go out yourself or send somebody out into the field to talk to the local commander and find out the real story. And they were rarely the same.
Yeah.
So now you come all these years later to this situation where the fog of war is even more dense than it was then, and it was pretty dense, and where it's very hard to take the Pentagon's story seriously. We have the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in a hugely unqualified cabinet.
Yeah.
And that is just a fact.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard for journalists today to give an accurate picture of what's going on in Iran. I have on my desk here 2 front pages of today's paper, right? New York Times, the Wall Street Journal.
Today being June 12th, 2026.
Correct. And the headline in the New York Times print edition delivered on my doorstep. I'm one of the few 100,000 who still print edition.
Yes.
Out of 12 point something million subscribers. Anyway, the New York Times headline is interesting. It says, Trump pivoting again, calls off new barrage in Iran, claiming deal is near. Notice the word claiming deal is near. Reversal after threatening oil takeover. So you get, just from that headline, you get the tone of skepticism, which is quite good and honest and justified.
Yes.
And here's the Wall Street Journal, a little bit different, generally a little friendlier to Donald Trump.
More conservative, yeah.
And more conservative. And the headline reads, same story, President backs off attacks on Iran. Eyes deal. Trump says last points resolved for pact. Tehran denies, quote, final conclusion. So you're left with absolute gibberish.
That's
How are you, the reader, you, the ordinary citizen, how are you supposed to interpret that? You know, it's a muddle.
Yeah.
And it's a muddle for journalists as well. And I know, I get it. It's an intentional muddle.
yes.
I wanted to mention one thing. I don't know if this is pending a tiny bit, but as I was planning and thinking about our questions today, I was thinking back to, again, the message from Donald Trump for 10 years. He's had that mantra of fake news, fake news, fake news. I remember that I looked up the article in 2016. Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes, which is quite in the news at the moment, as we know, said they were just meeting to prepare for an upcoming 60 Minutes interview. And she said she met with Trump in Trump Tower in advance of a recorded interview for 60 Minutes. And she said, at one point, he started to attack the press. There were no cameras in the room. I said, this is getting tired. Why are you doing it over and over? It's boring and it's time to end that. You've won. Why do you keep hammering at this? Leslie Stahl recalled, and he said, you know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all so that when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you.
Yeah. Well, that's just a page out of, or one of the members of the Nazi Party, the gentleman who was the propagandist. If you say something long enough, loud enough, and often enough, people will begin to believe it. And that's part of, Trump has been characterized as a master marketer. And if you look at a lot of what he has to say, and marketing is all about creating scarcity, creating division, creating an emotional position so that people act. It's not about reporting the facts. It's not about trying to reassure people. It's about getting an emotion going. And that's very much how he conveys things. And for a journalist, it's impossible to sort through that sometimes.
Right. I believe President Trump did listen to Joseph Goebbels in that notion that if you repeat something over and over, it will eventually become fact. And that he applies it in his own life.
Yes.
And his legal strategy came directly from the late Roy Cohn.
Yes.
So that's his strategy. We know that. This is the second term.
Exactly.
American voters should know that, should take that into account.
Yeah. And if they had issues with his policy, well, Project 2025 was all over the airwaves, and the Democrats at least tried to highlight what some of those political stances were that we now find so counter to our values.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to be the fellow who keeps pivoting to new directions here, but on the basis of what we were just discussing there, Terry, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. It's funny, again, I think this might be episode 15 or 16 of our show. And I've always tried to not be so polarized. It's fun. I like social media. I'm tempted to retweet everything. It's assume the worst, everything's terrible. Yes, I'm tempted to do that. But, a lot of our friends back at CBS News are very concerned about Barry Weiss's leadership of CBS News and the destruction of 60 Minutes and the very controversial, at the time we're recording this, the very controversial abrupt departure of Scott Pelley saying, "You're murdering this institution." And I was thinking, is there anything good about what's doing? I think that Barry Weiss, who I would say is unqualified, is trying to say, well, the times change, that this show has been the same for 60 years. It's that's probably why I love it so much. But how do you balance, like you said, you're one of the few people, hundreds of the 100,000, who still has the New York Times delivered on your doorstep, but people's habits and journalism has changed. And I hope we never lose sight of, the watchdog role and serving the public and all that. But things do change. And it's how do we balance all these things?
Barry Weiss was an opinion writer at the New York Times and argued repeatedly and vociferously with her colleagues, with the rest of the staff, usually on issues involving Israel. She is very pro-Israel and objected to anybody who wasn't. Finally, it became the atmosphere at the New York Times opinion section got to be so brittle that she was asked to leave, and she did leave. Now, to her credit, she then went and formed a successful website called the Free Press and managed brilliantly, I suppose, to persuade David Ellison, the owner of Skydance and now Paramount, and CBS, to pay her $150 million for the Free Press and to name her executive editor and top person at CBS News.
Yeah.
She knows nothing television and has demonstrated that again and again.
Quite a coup on her part. Yeah. But again, talking about the dismantling of CBS, which is kind of near and dear to both of us. I mean, I grew up watching, I remember when they said Walter Cronkite had a higher approval rating than Ronald Reagan, and Dan Rather being the beat reporter for the Kennedy assassination, and then so many, CBS is the pantheon of it. It's synonymous, I believe, with television news. But to see it dismantled like this, first CBS Radio, now 60 Minutes, and this under this cloak of, the product needs to evolve. No, it's more of the product needs to move in a direction that's consistent with the administration. And it's so transparent that it must rankle with somebody with your background, Terry.
Of course it does. It is shocking to me. And what I think you have to trace it back to is let's be realistic here. The dismantling of CBS News is a direct result of the new owner, David Ellison's desire to cozy up to Donald Trump and to get approval of his proposed $110 billion bid to buy and take over Warner Brothers Discovery, which will also include, incidentally, CNN.
Yes.
And so that is project goal number one for him.
Yeah.
And he to do, obviously, whatever he thinks is necessary to get the federal approval that is crucial to that very large dollar deal.
Even though in any other administration, this would not pass the litmus test of antitrust. And if we had a functioning Federal Communications Commissioner, it wouldn't even get past his desk.
On one of it, was it on Stephen Colbert or one of Jimmy Kimmel or something? Robert De Niro parodied the FCC chairman. It's like, you're going to do this the hard way or the easy. It's like a Goodfellas type persona. It's like terrible.
Right. Well, he went after Scott Pelley in his comments defending Barry Weiss and the administration. He's supposed to be independent.
It's interesting that he did go after those comments. That this dismantling, that's the term you're using, and I don't disagree with it, is so wrong and comes at a time, and Scott Pelley pointed this out, it comes at a time when 60 Minutes was building audience, added 9% more viewers in the last season, and is building. So 60 Minutes was not in trouble.
No, not financially. It was the number one rated news show. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so transparent as to what's really going on here that I suspect the public recognizes it. Now, we may lament it more than the average viewer, but I'm not sure. There are a lot of fans of 60 Minutes, and
yes,
people like Scott Pelley and Cecilia Vega and Sharon Alfonsi and the great executive producer Tanya Simon, who, Tom Martin, is the daughter of the late Bob Simon.
It's
Lee.
Yeah. Yes. Amazing guy. Amazing guy. Yeah. One of the things
I'd love to hear, I'm sorry, Rich, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'd love to hear, sure, we both would love to hear your thoughts about young journalists just starting out now. I'd like to believe there's going to always be, investigative journalists and people who feel a strong sense of serving the public and courageous, all of those qualities against this multi-million-dollar conglomerates crushing quality and integrity. What are your thoughts about all of that?
It is a fact that the attendance at journalism schools, I'm thinking of graduate schools particularly, but journalism programs at the university level is up. Now, think about that for a minute, because they're going into a totally changed world where everything is different and all kinds of conditions suggest chaos. And yet they care enough about it to do it, to make a career out of it. And they recognize, I'm sure, that the method of delivery of journalism to an audience is radically different and will continue to change. And they recognize, I believe, that they have to observe those basic principles that you were talking about. And they have to know how to do it in print. I mean, with words, in writing, in broadcasting, you have to do everything. Absolutely everything. Podcasts, the whole thing. Yeah. So they know that. They're going into it, and they're still coming. So that tells me that there are people who agree with you, Tom Martin.
That's good.
And I think, obviously, the way news is delivered today is not exclusively on over-the-air TV or even cable news. Tom and I have talked about, what's going to happen with the Stephen Colberts and the Scott Pelleys and all the others who have been ushered off of their traditional programs. There's an organization called the Midas Touch, which is a podcast, a left-wing podcast that now has 9.5 million subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's where things are headed. And
Yeah.
that's where Tom and I are kicking around this idea of, well, someone needs to start a true journalist network on whether it's YouTube or social media, where people do speak the truth about true journalism without exposure to the harm of the administration or of corporatists who are sowing their influence for whatever reason with the administration, where the editorial positions can be done without any filters.
I don't know.
Well, and look at who at the growth, for example, of all the mostly website online reporting on the news business, from Brian Stelter with his reliable sources to half a dozen others.
Yeah.
The news is in the news.
Yeah. There are websites like All Sides, which take a news story and reflect on the left-wing version, the left-leaning, the center, the right center, and the right version, and then kind of synthesize what are the facts around this story that we really need to get to, in spite of the way each of these 5 directions can spin it in a different way that's predicated based on its audience.
Right.
So you're right. And thankfully for that, because people we've lost sight of the facts because, cable news is left-wing, right-wing. It's designed to pit one another against one another instead of having what we used to have, which was a discourse, but one that was respectful. Yeah. Like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan could spar at each other in a session and then go out for a beer afterwards. But we have none of that civility anymore.
I think it was bourbon, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So
Probably just have time for 1 or 2 questions, but one for you. I don't know if this is too naive, but I do like what you shared with us about journalism schools and what young people are thinking these days, and that they know what they're getting into. I was just curious if you think that the general public will see through the Barry Weisses and see through Jeff Bezos decimating and the Washington Post and stuff like this, and then realize that we do need journalism. We do need to know what's going on in the world. There's many journalists with integrity, worthy of our appreciation. I mean, I'd like to feel that there's some hope for you.
I think there is. Don't despair. The people care about the world around them and need to know about it. And as long as that's true, and I think it will be true, then there's a role for, to use your phrase, true journalism.
Excellent. I'm happy to hear that.
we're hoping so. And to your point, Terry, I think people are smart enough to recognize that the last couple of years and even the 4 years prior in the first Trump administration, that, that there's a lot of untruths being told. And there's a lot of promises not being either kept or even being reversed. And, after a while, that begins to resonate with people. And hopefully they will be seeking what's really happening, not what they're being told.
You asked me the other day, Tom, what led me into journalism? Well, I was born into it. My father was Red Smith, the sports columnist, and once the most widely read in the country. But what you may not know is that at that point back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, all 5 working males in the Smith family, including my uncle and cousin and so forth, were writing for New York City newspapers.
Oh, wow. The Brooklyn Eagle. Yeah.
And one of the best was my female cousin. She was too. So it went. And so that's what I tried to write about or give the perspective. And forgive the promotion here, but let me hold up the cover of this book.
Yes, please.
And the title, Four Wars, 5 presidents, a reporter's journey from Jerusalem to Saigon to the White House. Well, that's the story of how it came to pass.
Yes.
And of course, it changes and goes on, but I think there are some good stories in there. And it's available on Amazon.
Here you go. Now to get a copy, and also you have a website where people can read your blog posts, and you write for Substack also.
Yes, I do.
Yes. We'll put all those links in our podcast so people have it handy. So, all right, we're going to wrap up, I guess, with our final segment, which we call The Wire, Top 5 Propaganda Stories.
Well, I'm also submitting a request for you to come back, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have only scratched the surface on what is really an extraordinary career. I'm just so blessed to be here with you today. All right, turning to our 5 stories. The first story is about the U.S. strike that we mentioned on the civilian water infrastructure, which the Pentagon termed surgical strikes against military targets, when others may say, when you attack a country's infrastructure with respect to water, electricity, food, or any of those things, that's a war crime. And NBC News geolocated, it is a war crime, yeah. NBC News geolocated footage that confirms 2 drinking water reservoirs serving 20,000 civilians were destroyed. And, Iran is a country in the midst of a desert. They don't have a lot of drinking water. In fact, a good portion of it comes from the sea, and a process that turns seawater into drinkable water. And there have been over 2,000 Iranian civilian deaths since this war has begun, but no one's really talking about that.
The greatest contradiction in terms, and it goes back to Vietnam or anywhere, is that phrase you used, or they use, surgical strike. There is no such thing.
What an oxymoron. Yeah.
It is an oxymoron, and we should recognize it as such.
I think I can't resist throwing in, I've always loved the humor, as pointed as it was often by George Carlin, and he talked about peacekeeper missiles, and like you said, the
jumbo shrimp, all kinds of acronyms there, contradictions.
Story number 2, and we've talked about this earlier in our discussion here, Trump saying Iranian peaceful resolution is near, and he pointed out that word, claiming, on the New York Times headline there. I thought that was really accurate. Yesterday, at the time we're recording this, she said a deal has been reached and will be finalized shortly. And a number of news sources, like I often listen to CNN or watch CNN, it's like, oh, this is the 39th time he's said. It's like, I really just don't know. But Iranian FM news source there says nothing has been finalized. Reports are speculative. Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is closed. U.S. sometimes says it's open. Again, the public doesn't know what to believe. That's what journalists telling us what's going on.
And it's interesting that NBC News and Al Jazeera are on the same wavelength in terms of reporting. Many of us turn to Al Jazeera for accurate reporting in that part of the world because obviously Israel has shut down local news in that respect. And I think many American journalists have found it difficult to get close to where they need to there. So
I am also a regular viewer of BBC America. There's the PBS carries their evening broadcast every evening, and I record it every night, and I try to watch it as often as possible because you get a more dispassionate reporting of this seeming contradiction. So I think it's well worth looking at other sources, Al Jazeera English, BBC World News, etc.
And the Warren Report, which I pick up too, which is from another nonprofit group. Speaking of which, the public broadcasting network has been gutted. Returning taxpayer money from biased media is the White House's justification for that, which is just, even though a judge blocked Trump originally on First Amendment grounds, which is an obvious call here, but 1,500 plus stations have already been damaged by this with Congress's canceling of the $9 billion funding last July. Just another example of the administration revoking First Amendment rights for journalists trying to just do their jobs.
Perry, I'd assume you probably keep in touch with your friends. You worked with that PBS NewsHour on the media.
I do. And it's a very serious challenge, but it's one that I think they are managing very well. The PBS NewsHour is all right. And one reality that won't surprise you is that when the government takes the money away, the private contributions increase. But they really have. But they don't last forever.
Yeah.
And yet neither do presidents. So we shall see.
Absolutely.
Very astute point, for sure. Tom?
Our item number 4, and when I first saw this months ago, video of the hallway at that point in the White House Hall of Shame, it just reminded me that some of those, editorial cartoonists who showed the big baby in his diaper, it's like, it's so, the auto pen for Joe Biden, it's just like, give me a freaking break here. But they said it's holding media accountable for fake news. We know where the fake news is coming from. But there are incursions into the way journalism is being done. Forget all those classified files in the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. I'm just a few miles from Mar-a-Lago here in South Florida, as a matter of fact. I don't plan to visit, by the way, but it's like, oh my God, we're going to rename our airport after this guy also. I don't either. But the FBI has raided Washington Post reporter's home. We knew that. Don Lemon of CNN, given after he'd left CNN, lives there at a church, seeking to speak to ICE, people protesting ICE, like how Bruce Springsteen wrote a song about the streets of Minneapolis. I give him credit for that. But the White House has seized press pool rotations away from the White House Correspondents Association, not to mention the altercation at that dinner. And I try not to fall into conspiracy thinking, but it's like, we don't really know how that all unfolded. It's just a crazy time. So back to you.
Yeah, and our final story is about the Gaza Phase 2 ceasefire talks, which the president indicated the Board of Peace is managing the ceasefire process, trying to, again, distance himself from the scenario that he initiated. Board of Peace, of course, is made up of his hand-picked cronies and people who contributed gobs of money to be a part of that very select group of people.
We'll see. Richard, you and I will see all that. The UFC thing that they set up on the front lawn of the White House, right? You're going, right?
And it's interesting that one of their champion fighters said that it's dead wrong for to do something like that. But again, Trump is a populist culture figure. He was heavily into professional wrestling. That's where he built a lot of his earlier following. And those are his people.
You might see these posts also, but again, I spent a lot of time on Facebook, for better or worse. So I'm curious what people are saying about our beloved show where you and I worked together years ago, CBS Sunday Morning. And so at one point, a couple months ago, they actually had a video story about Dana White and the UFC, and like one element about people slapping each other across it's like, if Charles Kuralt had seen that, he would be spraying. It's like, what? And so loyal viewers, and Sunday Morning had so many loyal viewers, they'd get up early, and it was not, we maybe didn't have ratings of 60 Minutes or anything, but such loyal viewers. It's like, what's going on here?
It's remarkable. It's remarkable, Tom, that CBS Sunday Morning has built audience and has a very loyal audience and continues to do excellent work.
Yeah.
So far, they have avoided the attention of Barry Weiss and David Ellison and others. It's my hope that will continue because it's a fine broadcast.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I was just about to say, I remember, Sam Donaldson and his coverage of the Reagan White House. Boy, we missed that. I know Tom mentioned earlier about, we did a piece just a week or so ago with another pantheon and female journalist, and we talked about how the lack of respect of this administration and mistrust and misuse and abuse of
Why
female
did
journalists is really, really telling and distressing.
Enemy of the people. That's the phrase the president uses about the media.
Terrible.
Enemy of the people.
Yeah.
Has a certain Nazi ring to it, doesn't it?
I postulated that they must have uploaded Mein Kampf to ChatGPT and created a business plan out of that. And in all seriousness, it sounds like a horrible joke, but
There's one other story that I would add to your list of 5 that doesn't get enough attention, in my opinion. That is the situation on the West Bank of the Jordan, where ethno-nationalist settlers, Israeli settlers, are physically attacking and in some cases even killing Palestinians who have been there for generations. And the government is looking the other way. And this has gone on because of the deal that Netanyahu made with extreme right-wing parties to put together his very fragile coalition.
yeah.
And so I think the news organizations need to continue to pay attention and maybe even do more reporting and get more people into the West Bank of the Jordan to report what's going on, because it's a scandal.
Good point. Thank you for mentioning. It's very
Yeah, thanks for bringing that to the forefront. And you're right, that is a big scandal, one of just many going on in that region of the world. All right, we're about to wrap things up. This has been an honor and a privilege, Terry.
And thank you.
I know you've covered, again, 5 presidents and 4 wars. And folks, read his landmark book. We highly recommend it. And you never stop writing. You continue to write. You continue to call out, which is really how we see you honoring true journalism. So we're privileged to have you today. So thank you for coming.
Yeah.
A pleasure to join you.
It's been an honor. And we already have that request. We want you back.
Yes.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you both.
And I typically close with what Edward R. Murrow said at the end of every one of his broadcasts, folks, and that's good night, in this case, good afternoon, and good luck.